Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Trondheim National Park for the final build of this leg of the series. How could we make a zoo in the frozen north, beyond the wall, without including the mighty polar bear? So, sit back, get comfy, and enjoy what might be the last time we see snow for a while. We are so close to the end now. I can feel the anticipation for something new just building up inside me. Of course, we still have the walkthrough next week, which should be a chill, scenic look at all the angles and effort that may have gone unnoticed. So that should be a nice, relaxing time. I mentioned last week that we had narrowed down our options for the new zoo to 3. The African savanna, the Middle Eastern desert, and the American grassland. Well, I have decided that the African zoo would be too big of a commitment right now. I'm still learning and developing, so smaller facilities will give me more of a chance to adjust. So it's down to the desert or the American local wildlife. I will let you know next week which one we will be going with. Could go either way at the moment. A desert would be complete opposite of Trondheim, another extreme environment that sort of narrows down the available animals, but extreme environments tend to push the creativity and get the most out of you. Getting through these early should broaden the skill set a bit. The American zoo would be more diverse, but in a way it would be going back to basics, starting from scratch across the pond. Which in a way would be a bit of a redo of the Highland Reserve, which could be quite satisfying, as I don't know if I'll have time to do any Return to the Highlands episodes before Planet Zoo 2. Our newest inhabitants, and our final inhabitants, are rescues from Svalbard. Wild polar bears are often tagged and tracked, partly for their own protection and conservation data, but also for public safety. Our new male is a big boy. It's a little bit underweight, but physically impressive. This cuddly, fluffy snow bear has been venturing into populated areas in search of easy meals, which is not ideal, as you might expect, as polar bears, despite looking like a warm beanbag with a button nose, are actually extremely dangerous, and one of the most aggressive bear species, known to hunt humans when seals are not on the menu. This one has been effectively scavenging around the outskirts of settlements, getting closer and closer, ignoring prevention measures. Got to a point where he's no longer hunting in his usual territory, and his presence is putting lives at risk. Mainly his own, as the residents aren't going to let him start picking them off. Although, that would make a cool movie. A polar bear hunting people in a small fishing village? Screams B-movie, but if Sharknado can make money, then anything's possible. Wildlife authorities have attempted to relocate him a couple of times to avoid any, deaths. But he keeps finding his way back to towns and villages. He is persistent. Whether he's got a taste for trash or people, I can't say, but at least here he will be safe and well fed, and he won't be able to terrorise the village. Although you've got to wonder what makes a person want to live in such a harsh environment in the first place. Maybe they like the danger. Our new female is a bit of a different story. She's already a popular attraction at a facility nearby. However, she is starting to show signs of outgrowing her habitat, so they've made the decision to give her a larger home. Polar bears have enormous territories in the wild, so space can often be an issue in captivity. Although, I guess you could say the same for any species. We've got a bit of a contrast here, in one bear that's sick of people and needs some space, and another that's ever so slightly too interested. So the idea here is to create something big and open, so the animals can get away if they need to, but the guests will still be able to see them from afar. With the opportunity for the big male to investigate a bit closer if he wants. There's not going to be a lot of guest viewing compared to other habitats, so it will need to be very open and unobstructed. Which works as far as I know, because the bears live in the Arctic, where it's mostly ice as far as the eye can see anyway. You rarely see polar bears in woodland photos. although they do have a surprisingly high tolerance for trees and plants in this game. Okay, well, I guess we should talk about what's actually going on here a bit. Similarly to the wolverine habitat last week, this one has been dug out of the mountainside. It's a bit hard to see until, you get the wide shots, but there's a very apparent interruption in the flow of the hillside coming down towards the lake. Obviously it's a significantly larger habitat than the wolverine one. I think it's actually the largest enclosure by far, which is saying something considering some of the things we've done here. In order for the keepers to access the habitat, I have an access route up behind the rear of the enclosure that I installed for the wolverines that I'm just adding on to in the other direction. There's a declining path carved into the rock at the back, down to a simple concrete structure that acts as a safety gate, but also as a storage area, as this is a bit of a trek from anywhere in the zoo. I've done a lot of tunnels, caves, that sort of thing at Trondheim, so I want to do something a little bit different, a bit of variation for the final build. The access path is partially covered, but open to the inside of the enclosure, so in true industrial fashion, I filled that hole with concrete. Oh no, it's not quite a tunnel in the way that we've known them so far, it's more like a potluck slip and slide, where one side is smooth concrete and the other is sharp rock and boulders. Start in the middle, and let fate decide what state you reach the bottom in. I did consider having some colour to add something eye-catching to this habitat, but in the end I went for various shades of grey, mainly because when the snow melts the polar bears are like gleaming white pearls against the greyscale backdrop. It was almost like an old black and white film for a little bit, and had it not been a bit too empty it would have looked really cool. However, as much as it might make sense in my head to have the bears in a barren landscape, they do have use for foliage, so I'm going to have to decorate it a little bit. What you might not have noticed from the angle in the intro is the second viewpoint into this enclosure. I took some inspiration from the penguins and the seals and built a large underwater viewing window into the cliff face to close up this bowl and make it watertight. As I said in the Himalayan brown bear video, bears in general are surprisingly at home in the water, and polar bears specifically might be some of the strongest swimmers. Well, you'd have to be if your diet was comprised of mostly seals. I probably shouldn't have put the polar bears so close to the seals now that I think about it. Their sense of smell is good enough to have picked them up from the other side of the zoo is probably driving them mad to be only like 20 metres away. Ah well. Thanks to the breeding mechanics that I mentioned in the seal video, we are never short of a few spare for sacrifice, I guess. I love how this whole series is about conservation and animal care, but every now and then I just sound very ready to turn over the good breeders to the carnivores for some feeding enrichment. It's fine. I'm pretending it's real for the narrative, but yeah. These are only pixels, relax, it's fine. Besides, I'm not actually doing it. I'm not a monster. Not in this game, anyway. My point is that the polar bears like to swim and dive and do little flips and rolls in the water, so some sort of underwater viewing area was kind of necessary for this one. The wall between the two cliffs actually looks monolithic as you approach. Even more so after I add in the bridge, which I think is a comparable size to the bridge at the entrance, maybe a bit wider. So not huge, but a fully enclosed structure, and this wall still clears it by a little bit, like a metre or so. I think I actually prefer the other viewpoint, but it's nice to have this extra option. It gives the guests something extra to see when they go down to see the seals. Now, the rockwork in this habitat is what really pushed the performance of my PC over the edge. Sure, these and the other million from the last 13 videos, but this was where it became noticeable when I was putting it all together. Again, I came into this with a plan to be more efficient, and as usual, I did the opposite, immediately. What I did do, however, is do a little bit less on the mountain in the background, so we won't go and look at that too closely over there, because it's acceptable from wherever you stand on the paths. This habitat is a bit of all of the past builds in terms of the rock use. I wouldn't necessarily call it a culmination of all that I've learned in this zoo, but it's certainly benefited from all that experience. We've got those smooth, vertical faces, some layered texture and inclines where the bears can access the water, nice underwater formations and that rubble layer where it's needed. I love it. I know it's going to be hard to work on projects with less need for it. Refreshing for sure, and quicker definitely, but I'm so used to making this a key part of my enclosures. Maybe I can focus on buildings or foliage next, depending on where we end up. Learn one aspect in every zoo until I reach a good level builder, you know? To be fair, there are some decent structures in Trondheim. There's that lynx cage that was a bit of a challenge, then the fox's biscuit tin, and the snow leopards, that was a good design too. I know I took it from someone else, but it was still a good execution. Not quite as difficult, but still something a bit special. One day I'll do a big city zoo and have all those extra restrictions like the limited space and less natural habitats, more constructed and out of place, you know. Not bad to look at, but just very, you know, you've taken an animal from the wild and put it in a city. It's not going to fit in perfectly. You need to make it follow regulations. You know what I mean. I think that'll be a sandbox zoo though, as I want to be able to turn the guests off and focus on what matters. That might have to be a Planet Zoo 2 thing though, now. This enclosure is right at the end of the zoo. I guess the other end is kind of the Himalayan brown bears up the mountain, so it's bear-capped, you could say. You wouldn't say that. It doesn't make sense. Anyway, I wanted this to feel like, as you walk up to the top viewing point and look out, that you could almost be in the wilds beyond the drop, immediately in front of you. Obviously we need to keep the animals enclosed, but you have this big white expanse in the background, like the Arctic. Just ice and snow as far as the eye can see. I would have liked to have the forest that wraps around the mountainside thin out a little bit more naturally, lead into this barren area, but I was wary of adding too much unnecessary decoration in case it turned my video into a PowerPoint presentation. Fortunately, from the angles you can actually see as a guest, it's all out of view anyway. It's only really looking overhead that it stands out. You know, now that I think about it, the building at the back of this enclosure and the covered pathway out of the area has something of an old World War II bunker about it. Maybe it's the narrow windows and the dark grey exterior. Which, now that I think about that, could be a really interesting feature of a habitat. Like an old concrete gun position with that narrow gap that's been retrofitted to some sort of animal shelter. And that's probably the last time you'll hear about that idea because it's just floated in and out of my brain. Unless I'm reminded about it at some point. I guess I could write it down, but... Something I didn't give much thought to in this build was a shelter. I think I might have had a plan to build something into the entrance building for the keepers, but inevitably I ended up not leaving enough space, and I then thought about some sort of canvas canopy on metal poles, half embedded into the rock, but it's hard to get that sort of effect right. I've seen people manage it, but I just haven't played around enough to do something really worthwhile with the canvas types that we've got. I ended up finding a large, rusted curved pipe that I used to create a sphere, or half sphere. It's not quite spherical even when it's finished, because I ended up stretching it a little bit to make some more room for the bears, but you get the point. I will admit, I was shooting in the dark on this one. No inspiration was really coming, and I didn't have a clear vision for what I wanted the outcome to be, so we ended up with this thing that looks a little bit like a golf ball, or an astronaut's helmet without the visor. It's completely different to anything I've done before, and it's so large that it can only really go in this enclosure. I don't know. I like it, but maybe it's a bit out of place. Let me know what you think when it appears. What I do like about it is it's open, so even though it's the complete opposite side of the habitat, you can still see directly into it when the bears are sleeping. It also camouflages a little bit in the snow. There you go. It's a giant snowball. With this habitat being the last build in Trondheim, there was a weird mix of not wanting to have anything half done to make sure that we finish with something awesome, but also a bit of restlessness and anticipation about where we're moving to. And I'm someone who loves, the beginning stages of things. For example, I love Ark. I have over 1,000 hours in the game, in Survival Evolved, and that's just PC. I've also got it on Xbox, and then there's Survival Ascended, and I think the old Xbox as well, so it's probably 2 versions. So, a significant amount of playtime. And I've started the game on the island hundreds of times, and I always stop around the time that you start fighting the bosses. I've never played it all the way through to the end. I love the initial stages, where everything's a bit more of a risk, it's a bit more exciting. Trying to get those first tames is a bit more challenging. You get to a certain point, it's like, well, this is easy, I'm just going to do what I have to do. I'm going to pick this up, I'm going to put it into a trap, and that's just the way things go. It's straightforward. And that sort of becomes less fun and exciting, it's a bit more mundane. So, I lose interest. Same thing with Pokemon. Even though they're some of my favourite games, I just prefer the challenge and the grind of those lower levels. But that means things that require commitment, I tend to drift away from. And that's partly why we are not going to Africa just yet, because I know that's going to be a big zoo, and I need to build up some momentum first to keep my focus all the way through it. By the way, I know it is a very big red flag, but it's fine, I'm at peace with it. That was actually one of the reasons that I started this YouTube channel. It was to help me finish Ark and actually stick to it to the end. Obviously, it didn't work out. Maybe one day though. It'd be nice to get some variety going on this channel. At some point, you will see the build of the viewing area at the top of the habitat too. You may have noted it in the intro already. It's similar, I suppose, to the viewing area in the Arctic wolves, but a bit lower, a bit larger, and there's less, but not no risk, of the bears climbing up and taking limbs, so this one's able to be a bit more open and a bit more decorative. I didn't want to go too overboard, but I wanted something a bit more Nordic than some of the heavy safety barriers and plaster, modern builds that we've done recently, to tie back into those original themes that we started with. I feel like we achieved that nicely, considering how much concrete and plaster and general grey that we've used in this build. The outlook point was what kept it all together with the zoo. I mean, it'll still be bloody cold up there because there's no roof again, but you'll get some great photo opportunities. You could sort of imagine it being a wedding venue or one of those places where people stand to watch criminals get thrown into the bears. Very romantic and picturesque. It is a bit of a struggle doing anything with circles though. Nothing ever seems to line up correctly when you get to the end. Roofs all need to be custom made or they cross over each other too much. I wonder if they'll make that sort of thing easier in Planet Zoo 2. Anything they can do to help with that. I don't know how exactly that would work, just making things able to be curved, but would open up a lot more opportunities creatively. I guess the last thing to mention is the foliage. I say last, it might not be the last. We'll just have to see where my brain goes. As I said, I've only really seen photos of polar bears in the barren white landscapes or on rocky frozen coastlines or swimming, of course. So, foliage didn't really cross my mind when I was putting this all together. We'll probably add some moss like the seals enclosure or some underwater grasses for sure, but above ground I was fairly happy just leaving it bare. The bears have a strangely high tolerance for it though, which sort of suggests that they need it. So while I could have left it bold, I decided the justification was enough for me to actually have some of this forest coming down from the mountain and infiltrating the habitat a little bit. Just a bit of variety to give them something different to explore. For one of these bears, there's a huge downgrade from the wild, where there were plenty of people to hunt and trash to eat. And for the other, it's a pretty big upgrade, from a cramped city zoo enclosure, all concrete and plaster and shallow diving pools. They all live safe and well fed, and for the one male that was removed from the wild, we've already released 2 healthy young adults to boost the population. That's right, we have had cubs at the time of recording that have grown up and left for college already, finding their own way in the world. One of the benefits of such a large habitat is that some of the more natural behaviours can be learned without too much interference. The bears are tracked and monitored and are currently finding their feet, or paws I suppose, mapping out their new territories and meeting their neighbours. We had to sit and wait once the build had been finished to let the money climb a little bit with all the guests before limiting them so that I could get some clean cinematics. I also needed to let all the research finish, which is why we had so much progress in the family. You might not get to see, as I cut the creation out to save some time in the video, but I made some shelves, or like a movable metal shelving unit with boxes and tools and all this sort of stuff, for the little storage area. In fact, you might get a little glimpse of it in the scenic shots at the end. I've seen that there are lots of blueprints in the workshop for bits and pieces like this, but I really like having things that I made myself to use. You know, those ones are probably much better than what I've done, but there's something rewarding about it. Things like fonts and cars for parking lots I would absolutely download, but decoration props, you know, things that would be useful for keepers or that you'd find around animal areas, I can at least give a go. And it actually looks pretty good, so it worked out nicely, but I can see some things going all wonky and unappealing in the future. I think if we end up choosing America for the next zoo, we will be making more food prep areas, so I'll build a bit of a bank of useful little items to use. If we go to the desert, then it'll be more similar to this zoo, where we let the keeper huts be the work areas and focus on the animals themselves and how to make the most of the environment. We'll see. There's lots I want to do all over the world, so who knows? And I keep adding to my list whenever I have random ideas, so it may go on for a while. It might be cool, actually. Similarly to how we have the shop counters, so we can make our own shop buildings. If we had a similar thing with keeper stations, you know, just add that to a big kitchen area that you've built on the side of a habitat or something, so these sorts of areas can actually get some use. Maybe there's something in that. We'll have to wait and see, I suppose. It'll be interesting when it does finally get released. I imagine there'll be fewer animals to start with, but I'm looking forward to seeing what different species they use and what they've changed. Hopefully it is a real improvement and not just slightly better graphics. I do love this game. I don't really have many real complaints about it. You know, I'll moan now and then about the things that aren't really important, but it's just a hobby of mine, you know. I'm British, so we like to moan. I just don't want to get all excited and buy the new Planet Zoo, only to find it's basically the exact same game with different animals, you know. If that's the case, just release another DLC. I'm sure it won't be though. They've had 7 years worth of feedback from the community. I'm sure they know lots of things that can be improved. So, I have faith. Well, I think that's all I have to talk about this week. As always, thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed my rambling, and make sure to stick around for the various bits of building towards the end. There's still some interesting stuff to see. If you want to, likes and subscribes are always appreciated. We hit 50 subscribers this week, which is incredible, and I hope I can keep making videos that you can all enjoy. I hope you have a great week, and I will see you next time for the final video here in Trondheim.